Hi, Dan.
Hiya.
How you doing? You okay?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Good, good. As we normally start with these things, if we could have a quick introduction to yourself and obviously what you do and who you're representing, please.
Sure. My name is Daan. I'm the owner of Performance Travel DMC in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. We work with a small dedicated team of professionals on group travel into the Netherlands, incentives, meetings, product launches, what have you. And here to speak to James today about the updates on the Netherlands.
That's great. So I guess kicking straight into it, what is the current situation within the Netherlands and with Amsterdam itself?
Right. We have a basic set of rules that apply for everybody at all times, which is basically washing your hands, coughing and sneezing in the elbows, keeping 1.5 meters away from other people. If you're sick or not feeling well, you stay home and you stay away from crowds, and you try and avoid crowds in general. So that's basically the general rules. And then we have some, for our industry, I would say, specific rules and regulations, if you will, where they make a differentiation between inside and outside. So inside, if we look at what we would generally use for our events and for your events, coaches, for example, there's max capacity, but face masks are mandatory. This applies for taxis, public transportations, and coach movements. For things like boats, which we use in Amsterdam quite a lot, transfer over the water, the capacity is amended. So if we have lower numbers without fixed seatings, reservations are mandatory up front, and the toilets generally are closed on the boats. Museums and attractions and what have you, reservations, time slots virtually everywhere. From the Heineken experience to the Rijks or the National Museum, time slots and max numbers. Then we had a recent bit of a spike in infections again. So starting yesterday, a health check is mandatory in restaurants and cafes, and guests are required or asked, the entrepreneur is required to ask the guest to provide their phone numbers and contact details for a source and contact investigation if required. It's not obligatory to give it, but when we do the groups, we generally have the phone numbers and the contact details of guests anyways. And fixed seating applies in restaurants, but also on the outsides and the terraces. So you're not allowed to roam around, and the 1.5 meter still applies, right? And then for event spaces, event locations, health check and reservation is still mandatory. It is possible to have a higher number than 100 people, but then this check is required. If you don't do the check up front, 100 people is the maximum, right? In the spaces where people don't move around, like a gala dinner, for example, then fixed seating is required. If that is not the case, for example, on a trade show where people move past stands, there's not a max number, and fixed seating is not required as long as the 1.5 meter is applied at all times, right? And then if we look at the outside, it's basically more or less the same. There's no real max for walking or cycling tours or things of that nature. But in Amsterdam city center, the maximum number is 15, even pre-corona. So that's not really a thing that has anything to do with corona. But basically, the other things apply for the same as on the inside. So it's possible to have higher numbers on outside spaces if you do the health check and the reservation up front. And if you don't do that, then the maximum number is 250 rather than 100. So that's basically the only real significant change.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned there about the health checks. Do you mean, just to clarify that, is that the sort of track and trace measure in terms of giving you details, or are we talking about temperature testing, that kind of thing?
We don't do a physical temperature testing, but it is a checklist that people, were you in contact with anybody with corona? How are you feeling? Are you not? So it's basically 4 or 5 questions that are mandatory to ask, which we are also, when we have groups coming in, are going to include into our list. But this obviously needs to happen. I think it's 48 hours max prior to arrival, right? So if I make a reservation today for a restaurant next week to go have a dinner with my wife, then 2 days out front, I get a link to a survey that I need to fill out. Or if the restaurant doesn't want to do that, they need to do it on site. So it's basically wait to be seated. You arrive, then they do the check. They take down your name, which you're not, by law required to give, but everybody does it because that's the whole thing with the track and trace, right? So so that's kind of how it works.
Okay, and it was good. It was good that you mentioned in terms of transportation, because that's been a key thing I think that we found coming up. People are really unsure in terms of what it means transportation. So you mentioned about coaches and things being full capacity, but with masks. I think over here we're sort of wondering. I think we're at least half capacity. So it's good to see that that's not been as affected.
Right. We've had that as well. So that has been implemented till 1st of June, and then it was released 1st of July with a higher capacity, and from 1st of July onwards, you were able to have max capacity again. Face masks is the only mandatory item that needs to be worn.
Okay. So in terms of events sort of moving forward in the short to medium term, it's obviously very, very hard to predict at the moment. But what we're trying to do is obviously raise a bit of confidence within the industry and our clients to sort of start thinking about events again. What sort of events could we look to sort of bring out to Amsterdam in terms of, is there certain ones that are going to be more prevalent? Is there a particular maximum group size? I mean, you were mentioning group sizes seem to be okay relatively, but what type of things can we talk to our clients about?
Well, the thing is that currently there's no restrictions. So we look, we have a thing called a dashboard here that everybody looks at. It's like a government website, and we see the increases in numbers and the decreases in numbers. And if there's an area that increases very much, rules might change in terms of those freed up numbers, and you can do as many people as you basically want. So we need to obviously bear that in mind. So also in preparing for that, coming over in terms of contracts and things like that, always corona clauses, very flexible terms and conditions. So that's something that clients generally love and also require prior to arriving. The time span to predict is so difficult. So I kind of stick with the new year, basically. Until then, I would say that lower numbers are key. Group size, say 50 to 100, is quite well manageable. The thing that we have, so I've had, for example, a group coming in, or supposed to come in September, with 200 people for a gala dinner. And then what you're noticing is that the gala, based on the 1.5 meter restriction, or the 1.5 meter distance between guests, the gala dinner venue tends to be not big enough, right? So we had a gala dinner in a really nice hotel ballroom, which is 900 square meters, mind you, it's a massive ballroom. But with 200 guests that needs to be seated in 1.5 meters from each other, the table size that you can, you have a 12-seater normally, a big round table where you seat 6, and then you need so many tables that it's basically not doable. So that's more, I think, the issue is that you're going to have to move to bigger spaces, and those bigger spaces naturally cost more money, although there's room for negotiation. I can also tell you that. But generally speaking, it gets a bit more complicated. But there are definitely possibilities. But in general, I would say group sizes up to 100 quite comfortably. Naturally, meetings, things where less movements are required in a day, have a better chance of working out properly. If we're constantly moving on tours, we're constantly moving to different parts, that poses a more difficult and challenging situation.
And the food and beverage issues as well, which we're finding with everywhere. That can be a particular shame, particularly in the Netherlands, because very, very good for the food and beverage out there.
Yeah. No, so generally speaking, I've not heard a proper consensus that we've had hotels saying, no, we don't do any more buffets, for example, and then we've had other because people need to take the tonsils themselves, and they go around. We've other that say, okay, we have a screen in front, and then there's a table below it where we basically pass the plates, and the chefs are behind it, it looks really odd, I suppose. But in general, plate service works out quite well. So people do that. In the hotels everywhere they wear face masks. They're not mandatory here, face masks, but a lot of the chain hotels have implemented it, and in restaurants some do, some don't. But the service just goes as regular.
And is there anything else that we need to know as planners or as delegates coming out? I mean, one thing that has been coming up across these sessions that we have been doing is more than ever, planners need to work with their suppliers, with their DMCs, because rules and regs are changing all the time. And, you know, it might take a longer process to actually get something planned, but more than ever, you know, it's going to be in the detail to make sure that everything is right and safe and goes
Exactly. Exactly. So what we're doing now in our contracts, what I already mentioned, if we go to contract, right? We've had a couple recently. Luckily, it was quite nice. But we added the Corona clauses, but also waiver and liability release is a thing that we all as an industry are going to have to build into our contracts in some way, shape, or form, either relaying it to the individual delegate or saying to the company, listen, we're going to do everything we can in our power to make it safe. We've taken these measures, but we cannot be held accountable if somebody picks up, because that will basically put me out of business if that turns into a claim. So I need to be very, you need to be very diligent with that. So those are things that we do address with our clients when going through the booking process. And apart from that, the rules and regulations change constantly. So it's we need to monitor it on a daily basis almost.
Yeah.
And that's where we come in, because we can basically put it on, in line for you, right?
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention in terms of anything you want people to know at all?
I mean, we've I think the smaller group size is a very good one to keep in mind. What we're doing to reinstate as much confidence from you, James, and from your clients in general, is that our contracts have significantly changed. For new bookings, the Corona clauses, I call them escapes, if you will, for both parties, up to 1 to 2 weeks prior to arrival. This naturally depends on supplier cooperation, right? But apart from that, we do check the health and safety documents of the suppliers and hold them accountable to delivering exactly the service as is described in the health and safety documentation. And our project managers, so people on site, basically play a double role now, because we're not only managing the group, but we're also ensuring the 1.5 meter distance and kind of being like police officer to ensure that we're all keeping health and keeping ourselves safe. So we're trying everything in our power to ensure that we can still travel and travel safely. That's something I'd like to add.
Sure. Okay. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Great. Same here, James. Good to see you, well spirited and in good health. Oh.
one for the bloopers.
Yeah, what the wind picked up, and I have an umbrella, so I'm sitting in the shade, but it came flying off.
That's okay.
Be sure to keep that in. That's hilarious.
I will do. And I look forward to hopefully being out there with you in the near future. Hopefully.
Oh yes, it'd be so great to have you guys over.
Okay. Cheers.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you for watching. We welcome any feedback and questions in the comment section below, and please make sure you follow me on all our social networks.